Good evening. Can you hear me? You can, okay. I probably don't need this. So hi, I'm Tracy Craig. I'll be moderating the meeting tonight. Thank you for coming in person, for those of you that are here. We're also live streaming this meeting, so we're going to go a little slower than normal, and when we have questions, we're going to repeat them so that people that are watching virtually won't miss out on all the fun. The meeting tonight is a community-wide meeting to discuss progress that's been made in addressing environmental conditions related to the former Ford Aeronutronics facility. That is not an easy word to pronounce, so, and we'll go through the history and then what the Water Board has been doing to address the site. Tonight with me is Jessica Law. I think everybody knows Jessica. She's been the project manager since the beginning of this project about 5 years ago. We also have Daniela over here, who's with Wood Environmental and Infrastructure. I think I said that right. And she is the project manager leading the project for Ford. Wood is Ford's environmental consultant for this. And then also Amanda Palumbo is here. Amanda has her doctorate, I believe, in toxicology. Is that correct? And is a risk assessor for the Office of Health, Environmental, and Hazard Assessment. Did I say that right? Anyway, she performed the risk assessment to look at how contamination would affect human health. So we'll be talking about that tonight too. So our format tonight, pretty short. Jessica will be giving a presentation. It's about 25 minutes. You're welcome to stop her at any time to ask questions. Again, because we're live streaming, we're going to hand you a microphone and you're going to have to repeat your question or I'll do it for you. And then we'll stop and we'll have questions and answers. When you came in, I hope you signed in and you should have gotten a packet of information. The presentation is in there. Oh, I haven't forwarded this. I'm sorry. There's our agenda. You've got the presentation is in here, the community fact sheet, some other items, handouts with acronyms and such. There's also a card there, and you should have been given a pen. So if you have a question, I'd like you to write it. We'll pick it up. We'll read it. Otherwise, you can raise your hand and you can be filmed. I just don't know how comfortable people are doing that. So dealer's choice on that one. 2 more items. There's some food over here. Please help yourself. You're also welcome to take leftovers. We have lots and lots of food. And if you have to use the restroom at any time, you walk out the door, go to the left, take another left, and then walk down about probably 20 feet. And, oh, you can go out that door? Oh, well, listen to this. Perry knows. You can go out this door, and the restroom is right there. Right there. Okay. Did I do it right? There's a sign, so don't listen to me. Perry will show you where it is. Okay, on that happy note, I'm going to give this over to Jessica to give her presentation, and we'll go from there.
All right, so I always say if you guys can't hear me in the back, I don't know how loud it is, but if it's not, just, I've always said you can give me the thumbs up, and I know it means it only goes so close. Okay, so there we go. So we'll go over tonight's presentation. For those that have been here, we're gonna mostly do a summary of what's new over the last 6 months. But prior, I am gonna go over just a project recap for those that are newer to the area, maybe haven't attended these meetings. Also give just a quick overview of what vapor intrusion is, as well as those environmental screening levels we've used. And then I'll talk about the remediation process and the path forward, including those remediation and mitigation strategies, and then we'll go over the next steps, project schedules, and part of the project schedules will be going over some delays that we have seen with getting the remediation systems installed. So I'll talk about that later on in the presentation. And then there are components of the assessment and remediation process that I'm gonna skip over. Just they've been previously discussed, but if you need clarification of how we get from point A to point B and where we're at now, let me know. Interrupt me, you can raise your hand. I can also address it. We can address these questions during the Q&A session as well. And really before I get started, I know this information is very technical. I do try to simplify it, but sometimes I don't do a good enough job. So if something needs more clarifying, let me know. I'm happy to explain it further as necessary. And then this is a project-wide update. We're not gonna really go into the specifics of what's happening in the community. We're doing community-specific meetings, but again, if you have those community-specific questions, ask them. And after, at the end of the presentation, and when we're done with the Q&A session, we'll have time to do one-on-one discussions if you have property-specific questions. So, you know, just to give a quick recap of the site and kind of the how and why we got here, I want to just orient you where we are on this site. So here is Jamboree. We have up here MacArthur, and there is Bison. The green outlined area was the original 200 acres that Ford once leased, and that blue outline area is where the former facility actually operated. That was the 98 acres, and that closed in 1993. And the cleanup activities occurred for about 3 years. And in 1996, just based on information provided by Ford, the Water Board determined that cleanup of that main area of the former facility was complete. And in 1997, the local oversight agency granted soil closure. And what that meant was soil had been cleaned up to the regulatory standards at that time, and this allowed the property to be rezoned from industrial use to residential use. And that's when redevelopment of the One Ford Road community began, which was in 1998. But there was the continued requirement for off-site groundwater assessment and remediation, and that's when the case was transferred to the Santa Ana Water Board for regulatory oversight. And since that time, the case has been an open case with us, and all of the work has been conducted by Ford under a voluntary agreement. And just so you know, California has the water code that gives us the authority to have this work investigated as well as cleaned up. And so we have some responsible parties who do not do it voluntarily. That's when we use the authority under the water code and issue an order. But here, all work has been voluntary. So in addition to that groundwater assessment and monitoring and remediation, in 2006, 2008, 2012, there were those limited soil gas assessments. I've mentioned them before. Conclusions from those were made that health risks from vapor intrusion were not present, but those conclusions were made without any indoor air samples being collected. It was also based on industry knowledge at that time. Those conclusions were also made prior to the 2014 US EPA memo regarding short-term exposure risks for TCE, or trichloroethane, and that's one of the primary contaminants of concern at this site. And as well as the San Francisco Bay's environmental screening levels that we utilize. So in 2017, we had asked Ford to prepare a conceptual site model. And what that is it's a report that looks at all of the site history, all of the data that's been collected, and it compares it to current screening levels and industry standards. And it identifies any of those potential data gaps. And it was the data gaps identified in that report that started this current investigation. And then in 2018, that's when the vapor intrusion assessment began. So just to give a refresher of what vapor intrusion is, and for anyone that's not attended one of these meetings, vapor intrusion is just the movement of vapors below the ground into a building, as shown by those red arrows on this figure. So first, in order for there to be the potential for vapor intrusion, there has to be contaminated soil gas. And we refer to that as soil vapor. And that comes from either contaminated soil or contaminated groundwater. And that soil gas is found in those tiny little air spaces between the soil particles as shown in this inlay. And I know at past meetings I've compared it to like the air spaces in a sponge. So at this site I mentioned, TCE is one of the contaminants we're looking at. Another one is PCE or tetrachloroethane. And both of these are vapor-forming chemicals. They are chemicals commonly used as industrial solvents and metal degreasers, and they were used during site operations. So as that soil gas moves below the ground, it can enter buildings through cracks in the foundation or utilities that enter the building, and normal ventilation can flush out the chemicals out of a building so it doesn't cause a problem. But if they do collect in a building and there's not enough ventilation, they can pose a risk to human health. And there can also be other sources of chemicals, both in indoor air and outdoor air. So if there's bad air pollution outside, that can come in to a building. That's why we collect outdoor air samples to see what's going on outside. And then if there's chemicals used inside the home, it can be cleaning products. We've seen hobby glues, some candles, gun cleaner, dry clean clothes, things like that. That can introduce chemicals into indoor air as well. So now our screening levels that started and determined what homes should be evaluated for vapor intrusion. So it's important, I know I've talked on this slide before, but I'm going to mention towards the end of the presentation about the use of site-specific screening levels that have been developed based on all the data collected. So I just wanted to give a quick refresher on this. And these are developed by research scientists up at our San Francisco Regional Water Quality Control Board. Again, same agency as us, but they are kind enough to share these environmental screening levels with us. And so they're developed for over 100 chemicals that give us screening levels for soil, groundwater, soil gas, and indoor air. And the way they're developed is by combining these three following elements. So first we have toxicity information for a specific chemical of concern, then the specific exposure scenario for each receptor at the site. So is it skin contact, inhalation, digestion, and then the acceptable risk level that the screening levels are to protect to. And so the acceptable risk levels include for cancer risk, it is a 1 in a million increased chance of developing cancer, and that's referred to as cancer risk. And this is a standard set by the US EPA. And the other one is no harmful non-cancer health effects, such as liver or kidney damage. And that is referred to as hazard. So those two calculations are what are considered when we make our risk management decisions, which are the next steps for these environmental sites. And the three elements are combined for a specific chemical. These ESLs, they address long-term exposure, so 26 years, and they are used so we can focus our attention on the most significant problems at a contaminated site. And they're a starting point. And I had said, a couple years ago at some of these meetings, we're gonna take that data and make sure it was protective enough of screening levels once we have data from the indoor air data. And the ESLs are not necessarily cleanup goals, but they can be. So if an ESL is exceeded in indoor air, we want that as a cleanup goal. We don't want exceedances because we feel that an increased cancer risk of that 1 in a million is not acceptable. So we want to address that. And I'll talk a little bit more on cleanup goals towards the end of this presentation. It's not advancing. Okay, and that's just the recap slide. So I just want to highlight what's happened over the last 6 months since our last meeting. So this covers the January 1st through June 30th timeframe. I see a lot of familiar faces, so I know a lot of you know there's been a lot more work that's been conducted, but I'm just showing a snapshot of the last 6 months. So for the vapor intrusion assessment part, you'll notice these numbers are relatively small. only 16 soil gas probes were installed in the last 6 months. That's because most of this soil gas plume has been adequately delineated. All of these probes, all of the locations, which is 351, get sampled 2 to 3 times a year. So this time it was I believe, just the one sampling event. We had all of them sampled. 55 homes were sampled. One of the good milestones that I see is that no homes were offered air purifiers, meaning of those homes sampled, there's not exceedances that are warranting, we're not seeing that vapor intrusion occurring. So this was a good number. I was really pleased to see that. And another one was that no new homes were added. Yeah.
Which home areas does this data relate to?
This is the entire project. So the question was, what does this data relate to? And this is across the entire project. So it could be in any one of the communities that are in there. And yeah, and so no new homes were added. And again, this was another big plus that means the areas that have been identified, people have all been offered. We're not coming up with any new, if you would like, surprises or unexpected results. Then the next one is the data gap assessment activities, and that's really where we're collecting some additional groundwater samples to provide some additional lines of evidence to explain where the soil gas contamination is coming from and to get a better understanding to help us with those next steps. So in the last 6 months, we had 3 locations where 7 groundwater grab samples were collected at different depths below the ground surface. And then what we're seeing is this data gap assessment activities is starting to wind down, meaning all of the questions that we have had and that missing information has been addressed and is getting addressed. And then finally is that long-term indoor air monitoring plan, and this is something that we've been bringing up here in some of the recent meetings. There were 188 properties that received letters for the long-term indoor air monitoring plan, and the frequency for that monitoring was included, so it could range anywhere from every 6 months to once every 5 years, and it was based on the concentrations of soil gas below the ground. So what are the concentrations? They calculated risk based on that, and it was determined. So if you're in an area where there's higher concentrations, you would have more frequent indoor air sampling. And as part of that long-term indoor air monitoring plan, 42 homes were sampled. And I want to mention that this long-term indoor air monitoring plan is important because it provides that analytical data to support that conditions are not changing. A lot of folks had their home sampled the 2 times. They got that kind of clean bill of health, if you would. We want to make sure that doesn't change. And we want the analytical data to support that. And if the conditions do change, we want to know so we can respond accordingly, because that's what's going to minimize any risk to you. So I will say, though, that changes are not anticipated given the data that we're getting right now and that I've seen. We're seeing most of these soil gas probes, the concentrations that are being detected are going down over time. This is another really great thing that we're seeing, but it's still important to confirm. We don't like assumptions. Assumptions can be wrong, and so we want the data to support it. So like I've said at past meetings, if you've gotten a letter to be a part of the long-term indoor air monitoring plan, I really encourage you to participate in that. And then this is just the general area. It's the same as last meeting for where the data gap assessment activities are being conducted. Just south of the facility and to the north in like the Newport North apartment area, that's where some additional assessment activity is going on. And then right there in the Belcourt Masters area. And that one is winding down. So now I'm going to shift gears. We're into what is being done with all of this data we've been collecting over the last 3 to 4 years. So once we have all of that data collected from the sites, we've prepared those risk assessment reports, we're able to make those risk management decisions. And risk management for this site is just the process that evaluates options for protecting public health from vapor intrusion threats. So our risk management decisions, they're based on those calculated risk and hazards based on indoor air concentrations and those future risk calculations based on soil gas concentrations. And it models risk based on the most protective assumptions for those future risks. And it's critical to understand both the current and future risk when making those risk management decisions. And then most importantly, our risk management decisions must be protective of human health and the environment. So I showed this exact slide at the last meeting, but it really does bear repeating just because our risk management decisions are the path forward from those human health risk assessment reports that were prepared for the site. And so of the 9 risk assessments, there's 3 primary paths forward. For some communities, we requested additional assessment, and this is because we need just a little bit more information to determine those next steps. For these areas, the risk is generally low. We're not seeing vapor intrusion occurring, and these areas will likely not need remediation or mitigation, but we just need some additional data points to confirm. Next is the feasibility study, and that's the report that evaluates the feasibility of implementing a cleanup technology, and this report also recommends a remedial alternative, which just includes 1 or more remedial technologies to achieve the cleanup goals. And we're requesting this report when the current risk, meaning that indoor air samples collected, is pretty low. I know it's loud. Sorry, are you guys still able to hear in the back with that? Okay. So that's when the current risk is relatively low, but the future risk is a little higher. And so here, that's when we're asking for that report. And then finally is the is that feasibility study and remedial action plan. And this includes everything from that feasibility study, but it also describes that recommended remedial alternative. And we were requesting this when we were seeing vapor intrusion occurring at homes, and that future risk was also higher. So some type of remediation or mitigation was going to be necessary. And then that leads us to the cleanup strategies. So on this slide, I'm still using that same kind of risk bar to show. But the cleanup strategies are those risk management decisions that the water board makes. It is determined by the calculated risk. So when risk is low, monitoring is typical to confirm that there's no unexpected changes. When there's medium risk, we're gonna still want to do monitoring. And if vapor intrusion is occurring, we'll likely move forward and request that mitigation, long-term mitigation goes on, like subslab depressurization. And then finally, for areas where there is higher risk, where we are seeing the vapor intrusion occurring, we want to conduct monitoring and move forward with either active remediation or such as that soil vapor extraction and or mitigation, such as the subslab depressurization. And remediation is only feasible when concentrations are high enough to be cleaned up. There's a point where the remedial technology can't remove concentrations when they're low. So I'm not going over this whole slide, I promise. You guys have seen this, I know, a few times, but it's a good visual because there's been some delays in that project schedule that I presented at the last meeting, and so I just want to show kind of where we are in the process. I do want to note that this is the remediation process that's being done for all sites, but the duration for permitting is taking a lot longer than previously anticipated for locations where there's an active remediation system planning to be installed. So I know at the last meeting, I was discussing the soil vapor extraction system that was proposed for the Bay Ridge Park community, and we were anticipating and on a timeline to have that system operating by July this year. We are not there yet. Permitting with Southern California Edison to get that power drop to the system, as well as permitting with the city, has taken significantly longer. These permit applications were submitted back in December. Unfortunately, the application packages are reviewed in the order received, and no amount of phone calls from me or Wood or I think anyone else helped. And I tried calling a few times, but I know Wood was calling weekly at a minimum. But on a positive note, things are finally starting to move forward in regards to getting those permits. Yeah.
Are they consecutive schedules from community to community, or is there overlap? So if there's a delay in Bay Ridge, is Delco where they're waiting to start their next step?
So
Repeat the question.
So the question was, is the delays cumulative? Is it going, are we going to see this kind of across the board from one community to the next? That is, they are seeing the same kind of permitting delay timeframes, but I know that Wood is looking at strategies and alternatives to keep Belcourt Terrace a little more on schedule if possible. So they are looking to see if they can keep things going. And that'll be an update to happen, I think, in the future. Here we go. Okay, so now I just wanted to go over the remedial action objectives, and those are the cleanup goals for soil, soil gas, groundwater, and indoor air. And we started the investigation using those environmental screening levels to screen for vapor intrusion at the site. And we have collected a lot of indoor air data and soil gas data. And so now we are able to use that data for the risk assessment results and to establish the cleanup goals for the site. And these cleanup goals, they have to be protective of human health and the environment. So for direct exposure, such as shallow soil and indoor air, the cleanup goals are those environmental screening levels because the risk is already calculated using protective scenarios, and exposure is possible. Now, when there isn't direct exposure, such as that shallow groundwater, not drinking water, deep soil, that soil gas, site-specific screening levels can be utilized, as well as looking at the trends of those concentrations. Are they decreasing, increasing, to help support the cleanup goals? And I want to mention that site-specific screening levels are very common, not only across California, but across the country. And achieving these goals with the supporting analytical data is what gets the site to closure. So I do want to touch on site-specific soil gas screening levels because they were developed as part of the cleanup goals for this project. So those site-specific soil gas screening levels are based on the data collected over the past 3+ years from this site. They are developed in the same way as those environmental screening levels, but they use site-specific information. So one of the things that we're looking at is, what is the reduction of that soil gas below the ground to indoor air for all of the buildings that we have data for? Now, the environmental screening levels use a very conservative reduction factor of that soil gas to indoor air, and that's why those screening levels, those ESLs, are going to be lower than what the site-specific screening levels are. And then we did ask that a safety factor be applied to account for any possible changes that may increase vapor intrusion in the future. And again, site-specific screening levels are very typical for sites across California and the country. So the what's next, what's beyond? And I had mentioned there were 3 main things, and I mentioned this at the last meeting. We have monitoring. That's going to be ongoing until case closure. This includes groundwater and soil gas monitoring and that long-term indoor air monitoring. And one of the things I want to note that is new is that Wood recently submitted a request to reduce the number of samples being collected. So these soil gas probes that have always had non-detect results, there's never been a detection, or that have consistently, they haven't been able to get a sample, they have no flow from them, to be removed. That is pending my review. We will look at that and confirm what they're asking and everything else, and then get back to them on this. The next one is the risk assessment report. So as you know, homes get their complete data set, they've been sampled at least 2 times in different seasons. We want them evaluated, and to make sure, again, things are not changing. So all of the initial human health risk assessment reports have been submitted, reviewed. We've talked to everyone about them. But 2 new amendments were submitted, one for Bay Ridge Park and one for Belcourt Terrace just last month. And Amanda with the Office of Environmental Health Hazard Assessment, our toxicologist with the state, but who is assisting on this, is going to review it and look at Wood's calculations and then provide comments and stuff. So we'll be looking at that and verifying it. And then remediation. So I mentioned, you know, we're seeing some permitting delays, and that has extended the time frame. But, you know, Ford and Wood are working closely with those permitting agencies to try and get that forward progress, as well as looking at other options to keep the other projects on track.
Could you just elaborate a little? Are you talking 60 days, 3 months, a year? We won't hold you to an exact.
Right, okay, so the question is how long are the delays that we're seeing? And I know initially it was about a 6-month delay. And I think I'll have, when we go to Q&A, I'll have Daniela elaborate more on that, because I know she's at the forefront of all of that planning and can probably give a better answer. And so, you know, we're continuing that data gap assessment activities. We are really close to being done, and we can wrap and really fully move into the cleanup phase. We still want to gain access and test indoor air. You know, we are reviewing those feasibility studies, which is getting us to the cleanup portion of this project, and we're holding community-specific meetings to discuss those plans. And we're beginning the remediation activities in those select areas, and it is following that remediation process. And community-specific meetings and communications are ongoing and as needed. So for more information, you can always go to the water boards, the state water boards database that has all the site reports, our responses, analytical data, which is GeoTracker. You can sign up for the water board's LIRIS list, which is our email notification. We typically use that to communicate when the next public meetings are. On the Santa Ana Water Board's internet site, we have a web page for this. That page primarily has public outreach documents. And then Ford has their site-specific website, as well as an information hotline number. And there is the local information repository here at the library, just down that way. So there's hard copies of the reports there. And then we can go to Q&A.
Okay, so we're going to go to Q&A, and a couple things. If you got a card and you have a question, you can either write it if you don't want to have the microphone in your face. If you just want to ask a question, you can raise your hand and I'll come over and bring the microphone to you. We also have people that are watching this on live stream, and they'll be submitting questions on cards, and I will read those and we'll answer them. Again, we're going to repeat all the questions so folks that are watching this virtually can participate and hear all the information. I have a set of questions I've already gotten, so I'm going to read those first. And first, Daniela, I'm going to ask you to elaborate on the permitting question, why those delays and what they really, how long are they?
All right, can people hear me? There we go. All right, so with regards to the permitting delays, we sort of set a schedule that you guys heard about last time, assuming about a 3-month process with permitting with the city, permitting with SoCal Edison, and permitting with the South Coast Air Quality Management District. We have been working to get our permits to the top of their list. Like Jessica said, we submitted these permits back in December, and they were being looked at on a first come, first served basis. And only in the last couple weeks have we made it to the top of the pile. So that's about a 6-month delay from what we expected. We're still now in the permitting process. We have contacts at the city, at SoCal Edison, that we're communicating back and forth with. But that really is now sort of our 3-month, I would say, like, start. So we're looking at, for Bay Ridge Park specifically, we're looking at around a November timeframe for construction. And then the system we're hoping to turn on in early 2023.
Okay, thank you. And then I have 2 questions here. What percentage of homes in Bay Ridge have been tested?
So I had my colleague look up specific data. Heidi, do you have that number? So Heidi just said, in Bay Ridge Park specifically, 65 to 70% of the homes that we've requested indoor air sampling, which is about 90% of the homes, have had their air sampled at least once.
Okay, and then the second question, after years of interior testing of homes, what is the general trend that you have found?
So kind of like Jessica alluded to earlier, is we're kind of at a stage where there's no longer any real surprises. I would say the vast majority of homes site-wide and even within any given community are not exhibiting any evidence of vapor intrusion. There are a small subset of homes that are in the areas with the highest soil gas that we're planning on doing the soil vapor extraction system in, where we, in some areas, some seasons, see some vapor intrusion occurring. At those homes, we've offered indoor air purifiers to try to mitigate while we're setting up the system. What we generally see with the air purifiers running is the concentrations reduce below the target screening levels. But we aren't seeing, I would say, in the vast majority of homes, any indoor air risk related to vapor intrusion.
Okay, thank you. Do I have questions from the audience? Perry, yes?
Jessica, I got a little bit of conflicting information in your presentation.
Okay.
First, you said that the findings show improvement. We're improving. And then there was another slide that showed a plume that's down on the other side of Bison in the apartment complexes over there. That's the first time I've seen it go over that far to reach that far away from Bison. Those 2 bits of information seem to conflict with each other.
Okay, so I know what you're talking about. That was part of that data gap assessment. For a while there, that soil gas plume had extended to that southern end of the Newport North apartments over in that Caltrans right away, that bike path area. And what we didn't have information for was as it followed on the west side of Bonita Creek along that bike path. So some soil gas probes have been installed, and that's been some of those data gap assessment activities. And that's where the new homes, last meeting, I'd mentioned new homes were brought into that indoor air investigation area, and that's what it was homes in Newport North. From that, there was this extra little kind of lobe of the soil vapor plume that had migrated over there. And that is mostly delineated now.
Is it because that's a new finding, or is it because the plume is moving in that direction?
It seems more like we just got the data points there, and so it's that newer finding. I'm not seeing data that's suggesting it's moving, but some of these probes are new, and so they've only been sampled once or twice, and it's not enough data to say what is happening. So we need a little bit more time, but I think it's just remnants of groundwater contamination.
Thank you.
Okay, I'll get it in just a moment, or Sarah will pick up that microphone for you. We have a question from the people watching virtually. How long ago did the testing start, and what prompted the testing?
So the vapor intrusion assessment portion, that began with that conceptual site model report that was submitted in 2017. It identified that need to look at soil gas again, and that part of the assessment started in 2018. And if you want more details, I mean, the environmental investigation began in 1990, and that was just the due diligence when Ford was getting ready to close the facility. Any large operations like that have to do their due diligence, and that's what initially opened the site.
Okay, this is another question we got. I am a relatively new homeowner, having purchased my home in Belcourt Terrace in April 2022. How can I learn the history of in-home testing at my property? And then there's a specific address, and I would say for specific properties, best to call Jessica directly, or the Ford 800 number, and you can talk with Daniela. But why don't you just go through how people can get information again one more time? And in the packet of information we handed out, there's all kinds of resources there.
Yeah. A lot of times if you are new to the area, the best way to get kind of brought up to speed is to call me or call that 800 number, that Ford information hotline, and they'll patch you through to Daniela. She'll give you a call, and we are happy to spend whatever time you need to kind of get up to speed, because it is a lot of information. And I mean, we've been presenting on this for 4 years almost now, and it's a lot. And so we understand that and definitely can appreciate that. So definitely please reach out to us anytime.
And Jessica, you can provide both the overall and then property-specific results if you have them, correct?
Yeah, okay. And if you've got the results, we can, if your home is in an area that's been tested and you need some just further clarification on what the results mean, we can go over that as well.
Okay, and then also we will stay here after we end the meeting. We have the maps up here. If you have a specific property and you're in the audience, we're happy to talk with you tonight as well about your specific circumstance.
Tracy, we have a question over here. I'm just wondering, maybe you could just reiterate, how many monitoring elements are you going to be installing in Belcourt Terrace?
Okay, I'm just going to repeat this. How many monitoring elements are you going to be installing in Belcourt Terrace?
So are you referring more for the remediation system that's going to be going on, or just monitoring points in general?
The same installations that you're now in the process in the Bay Park, are those going to be also installed in Belcourt Terrace?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so the activities in Belcourt Terrace that are kind of ongoing and planned, we recently installed 3 groundwater monitoring wells. That happened a couple months ago. And we have planned 7 soil gas probe installations that are going to happen in August. That's going to kind of happen in the landscaped area around the pool, because Jessica identified that as an area that needed more data. That's for monitoring purposes. And then when we're talking about the soil vapor extraction system, which is also planned, that's going to have, I believe, 8 extraction wells. They're going to be installed within the road on Hillsdale Drive with some underground piping connecting them. And that's likely that construction is going to happen early 2023.
And I'll add that for the Belcourt Terrace, those 7 additional monitoring, soil vapor monitoring points. When we were doing the remedial design implementation planning and Ford was holding their meetings with the community and explaining it, there was concern about the logistics of disrupting the very mature landscaping and what are the options to change the system design. And from the modeling that Wood performed, it looks like, the reconfiguration of that system should be sufficient to address the soil vapor plume. But as the regulatory oversight, we want to make sure that that's happening and that it's not creating an area where high soil gas concentrations are going to linger and potentially negatively impact indoor air. So we had a couple additional monitoring points to provide that data.
Okay. Here's another question from somebody watching us virtually. Have there been any health concerns raised yet from homeowners regarding having cancer?
I'll let Amanda answer that one.
Amanda.
And maybe you can talk on the early on the couple of contacts you made and stuff.
Right. So there was and yeah, help me remember because we've been doing this for 4 years. So there were questions early on about people, who knew somebody or their child had cancer. I think there was a child with a brain tumor. So what I could tell them was some of the effects that scientists have learned about because people have been using TCE in industry for many years. So there's been several studies or many studies of people who've been exposed in the workplace who were actually using the solvent and breathing the vapors. And the main cancers associated with those exposures was one, there was strong evidence for kidney cancer, and then mild evidence for non-Hodgkin's lymphoma and a liver cancer. And so I haven't heard of people having those types of cancers, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think.
Right, and then I know early on you had contacted the California Cancer Registry, and they look at any kind of statistical anomalies, and you had reached out to them, and there was nothing that was statistically like swayed noticing those kind of cancers in this area. And you also, I believe, reached out to the birth defects registry that they look at that as well. And there was no kind of statistical anomalies for this area either.
Right, because the doctors are obligated to report when they diagnose a case of cancer or a birth defect. So the public health department has stats on all those types of effects. So we were able to look into that.
Okay. Is anyone collecting any kind of health data on the properties, and then in parentheses, understood HIPAA? Are we collecting any kind of data on health data? Are we collecting health data on the properties?
No, we're not.
No, I didn't think so. No. Okay. Other questions?
We have one more question.
Actually, I have a couple.
Good.
Scheduling. We've asked before for a detailed schedule so that we can understand when these major inconveniences are going to happen and we can arrange our life accordingly. I had a letter that came back that told me, things like in June we're going to do this, in July we're going to do this. What I'd like to see is your CPM schedule, critical path method schedule. You have to have one. You probably update it monthly, and you've got every task you're going to accomplish, and you've got a time frame to that. And if you're having 6-month delays, that's got to be built into that schedule as well. So could we please make that schedule available to us? We're more than capable of understanding it.
Yeah, we do have a schedule. It gets updated even more than monthly. You're from Bay Ridge Park, correct?
Yes.
So we've been working, Bay Ridge Park has a construction management consulting group, Summit Consulting, that has helped with other activities in Bay Ridge Park, like big painting activities or other kind of, community-wide. So we're actually talking with Mike from Summit Consulting, who's going to represent Bay Ridge Park to help on the kind of liaison between scheduling, communication, distribution of information, so that we have a go-to person and it's not sort of falling on the HOA board and other, volunteers that, volunteer their time, right? That people are busy. So we're setting things up with Mike. We've had a couple of initial meetings, and that is really going to be, I think, our best way of communicating through, to get information to everyone. And Mike is going to be kind of the champion for Bay Ridge Park in terms of the communication on schedule and things like that. We can provide kind of an overview schedule out, but things are changing sort of daily, kind of depending on how much information we're getting with the city. Like I said, the city and SoCal Edison, it's only been in the last couple of weeks where we've been able to even communicate with them despite contacting them weekly. So our updates on the schedule are kind of fluctuating basically every time we talk to them, and they tell us, you know, we need this or that, and we need that, this, that, or the other. So I'd rather share something when we have a little bit more confidence in the time frame, but we're getting really close, and we're gonna be very clear and communicative about the schedule when things start to happen.
Not sure what all that meant, but what I'm hoping is that we're privy to the schedule. I'm hoping internally Bay Ridge that I'm not dependent on it trickling down through my board to me. I
Yes.
would like to see your CPM schedule whenever that's available.
Understood.
All the time.
All right, we'll get that out to you guys.
Okay, I have another question.
I just want to make sure, do we have your name and number and email? We do.
It's Rob and Nancy Jones, 112 Hartford Drive.
Yeah, I've got your email address, and I'll make sure that that Daniela has it, and that they provide.
Yeah.
They can email you that, and when it does come to the actual work, they're still doing their work notifications.
I understand
yeah.
you guys aren't close yet, and it'll be dialed in more later.
Rob, we have your number, and we'll make sure that we get you that information.
Okay, the next one is impact mitigation, okay? To get your mitigated native deck approved, you guys had to come to us. We put together a list of our concerns, things that we'd like you to respond to, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. One of the biggest issues we've had for 30 years is obviously parking. Okay, we live in the back corner where it's probably on steroids back there, okay? So my concern is, I come home the other day, I turn the corner, and there's a large truck, oversized vehicle, that is there to do monitoring, reading your monitoring well. He's parked in the red next to a curb. He's parked directly next to a fire hydrant. You have 5 people on site. The other people came in their own personal vehicles, were parked in 2 parking stalls, okay? I do my typical scan. I have a car in the garage. I drive to the pool. I park my car. I walk back to my house. No big deal. But the things that we had proposed to you were extensive things, like nobody would be allowed on site. Everybody would park across the street, and you're going to mitigate or negotiate that with the church. You're going to shuttle people over. When does that start? Because we're into this project now, and it's an inconvenience, and I don't think that's fair to come back and say, well, when we really get the real show going, then we're going to start addressing this thing. We're being inconvenienced now.
Understood, and I'll clarify with my staff that we're starting, the work is, like you said, the work is happening now. We'll make sure we take up fewer parking spots, and
All the time. It should be our parking spots. You go park across the street.
Okay.
You go somewhere. I don't care.
Okay, Rob,
It's not
I think
fair to
Danielle has
us.
made a commitment that she'll check with her folks and that they won't be doing that anymore. And if they do, call us and let us know. But I think that this is in public, so it's going to happen. So thank you for letting us know.
Lastly, we read a card from someone, I thought they lived in Belcourt Terrace, and they were asking for additional information on their property because they are recently new homeowners. I would love to know from them if their escrow papers disclosed any of this when they bought their property.
Yeah, well, if they respond, we'll let you know. I think that was a virtual question, so we'll give them a couple minutes.
Okay?
Or if they don't, I have your name and number. And oh, is it you? It was my question. Oh, it's you.
Oh, wow.
It was.
Yeah.
We have 2, so hang on. We're prepared tonight.
Oh, she says, or he says the answer is yes, that the information was disclosed. And I will say for over the last 4 years, that's been a question that has come up. And, what do we do when we want to sell our property and stuff? And how do we get this information out? And so I know Ford provided this like one sentence, almost like a cover letter disclosure type statement. And in what we have said, in what we have done over the last several years is potential buyers call us regularly and we communicate with them any questions they have. And a lot of times at that point, they're in escrow, they've got indoor air sampling results. And they're saying, what does this mean? And so we explain what it means, where the investigation's at, what are, the kind of future next steps, what's the time frame. The time frame's long. It is hard. I know that's always been that. When is it going to get to closure? And it's hard to predict. We're gonna, I think, get better answers once the remediation starts and we see, you know, what happens once that remediation systems get turned off and what we see happen with the soil gas. Then we'll have a better time frame of when the site is going to get to closure. But it's a couple of years, it's several years out.
Okay.
The invasive work is starting to reduce. It's going to have that big, huge impact when it comes to the system installation. That's going to be very noticeable. But after that, it will taper down significantly.
About how long does that system installation take? Say just in Baywatch, the size of our community.
So the
I'm going to
question-
repeat this question. Oh,
I'm sorry.
So the question was, how long is it going to take to install the remediation system? Both the time frame for both Bay Ridge Park and Belcourt Terrace.
So the installation process is probably going to be about 3 to 4 months, and it's going to be done in sections. So there's kind of two elements. There is the underground trenching portion to put pipe in the ground, and then there is the building of the system, the treatment system compound. That building of the treatment system compound is actually happening off-site, and we're getting it shipped here so that we have the least amount of impact on the community. We can essentially place it on the concrete slab that will be laid. The trenching portion is going to take a while. What we're doing is going to do it in sections so that we can repave portions or have it drivable, things like that, with the prioritization of reducing impact to the residents there as our top priority.
okay. But in total, 3 to 4 months. Is that correct? Yeah. Okay. And it will be phased to reduced impacts. And I think that we'll have somebody that's a liaison to the community as well to handle anything in real time.
That system, is that still going on right outside the gate onto Country Club?
Yeah, it's
I need you to repeat.
sorry. The question was, is the treatment system compound still going outside of the walls of Bay Ridge Park? And that's correct. It's going to be along Country Club Drive. It's not going to be within the kind of residential Hartford Drive area inside the gates.
Okay. And I believe that I see you and acknowledge you. Please go.
Okay, I just had a question. Has anybody had a problem with insurance, where insurance companies are not wanting to insure the condominium? The reason I'm asking, I had new insurance come. I got declined, actually. They quit my insurance because we had flat roofs. So my concern is, I now have insurance that will allow the flat roofs, but do we have to disclose this to insurance companies, or is there a problem with, is anybody having this as a problem with their personal insurance company?
So I will say, I have not heard any issues with that.
Yeah, and like Jessica said, we talked to new homeowners, we talked to real estate agents. That has not been brought to my attention yet.
I would also add that all of us work on a lot of sites where this is a common issue throughout California, in fact, the United States, and I have not heard any kind of issue with homeowners or commercial insurance. I'm no expert, but I work on a lot of properties. And Perry, did you have a question?
I am an expert.
He is an expert.
On insurance, did they disclose to you why they were rejecting insurance for you?
The flat roof.
Okay, that has nothing to do with this issue. Okay. But I would recommend you contact the hotline at the California Department of Insurance and share your information with them, and I think that you'll get a proper response to this issue. Understood. Thank you.
Other questions? Okay, do we have anybody else virtually? No? I'm going to give you all just I'm going to give you a minute to think about it, and there's a gentleman over here. Hello.
Hi, I'm a newcomer to this community. This is the first time I'm hearing this problem. What I gather is that there isn't enough evidence. Current residents are suffering from medical illnesses, right? Am I assuming that correct?
No, So we are not seeing any evidence that people
Right.
are having,
Exactly.
negative health
Correct.
And
effects.
then the question I have is that is there a mechanism that you collect all this data, medical data from these residences?
So that the only mechanism that exists right now would be the California Cancer Registry.
Oh, no, I'm talking about not just the cancer. There's a immediate or long-term other than cancer problems from these chemicals that I know of.
And so, you
It is
know,
written here.
there isn't a mechanism.
Right. So that's the question I have. You know, without knowing exactly how much of an impact this chemical does to the human, are we not overdoing this?
Are we not overdoing the work?
Overdoing the
right.
study.
Of this whole thing.
Like,
So no, because there are standards regarding contamination, and we want to make sure any contaminated sites are cleaned up to the most extent practicable, and that there is no potential health risks. And the protective measures are set at that 1 in a million increased risk. This is what's considered acceptable by the US EPA. For that, especially for that direct exposure. And so that is what we want to meet. And so we, as the state oversight agency, we don't feel that it's too excessive.
Yeah. Right.
Maybe
like,
I can
like you mentioned.
I can add to this a little bit. So it's difficult to find cancer related to contamination in a study like this because there's a high incidence of cancer in the general population, and because people move around, they go to jobs and are exposed to chemicals. So that's not the most protective way to approach this. I mean, Jessica's saying we're trying to protect against a 1 in a million chance of cancer, and if you think about all the people that live here, we would have to have like a much higher rate than that to be able to see it in a study. And it would be a much less protective approach than what the water board is doing.
That brings me to a second question, is that when I saw this result, that not many houses are showing that high level of toxicity of concern. So then again, the question is, are we not overdoing things?
Well, I would just say that California's levels are very, very conservative. So to that point, they're very protective of public health and the environment, and both in the short and the long term. And Jessica is required, the water board is required to clean up to these levels if they identify a problem.
And I will also say, we a lot of times typically when a site gets to closure, it gets a risk-based closure, meaning there's still going to be contamination below the ground, but we have determined there's not risk to human health. What we are seeing with a lot of these studies, this is why like the long-term indoor air monitoring plan, majority of these homes are going to be once every 5 years to sample, not the every 6 months or excessive like that. But we want to do kind of check-ins, if you would, to confirm that nothing has changed. And so that's how we are reducing from this initial, kind of amount. It was a large amount and large effort that has gone on over the last 4 years. And so now we're going to be scaling back once we get into this remediation phase.
To elaborate on the issue, the question, this is not a cancer that's going to hit you quickly. So I think what we need to be judging is the long-term effect. So talking to the current homeowners isn't going to provide much information. I think, Amanda, the question is to you. Could you do a demographic survey of original homeowners who lived in these homes 20, 25 years ago? Could you contact them or look at their death certificates, look them up? Can you identify the people who lived in those homes? Because I've only lived there 15 years. Probably too soon to pick up on the damage that would have been caused. But the people who lived there back in the early 80s, if they're alive or, if they passed away, we ought to try to find out why they passed away.
So I don't actually probably have the capability to do that. But again, it's like you could do a study of those people and try to figure out, you know, like it is, if you try to do a statistical, what ends up happening is like you usually do stats, like compare the exposed population compared to an unexposed population. And you really have to have a high rate of cancer in order to show it. And so people can be affected by the site, and you wouldn't find it in a study like that. You couldn't prove it with that type of information down to the level that we're trying to protect you with the 1 in a million thresholds.
And in a lot of times where, for a lot of the contaminated sites, not this site, but sites that have really heavy contamination, a lot of it, where they do see risk would be your more sensitive populations, where they're seeing that cancer. And it would be cancer clusters with kids. That is what has happened in some of the big environmental cases across the country that have opened things up, as you see it in those sensitive populations like children. And again, we're not seeing any kind of things like that here. And we are maintaining those low protective numbers because it's the right thing to do. And it's the correct measures, and why the US EPA set those standards.
But I'm also just trying to think, because we did look at that cancer registry, and so that would have been like anybody in the neighborhood, it would have looked, but they only had, I think it was limited, I forget when the data went back to. I think they only had data to the 80s, but if they were here in the 80s and got exposed, they should have been included in that.
Okay, other questions? All right, we will stay after. If you have if you have a question specific to your property, or you're not comfortable talking in public, we'll stay here and answer questions. We have maps over here. I think our next meeting will be in about 6 months or so, and we'll have a same thing, virtual meeting. I hope you all stay safe, and thank you so much for coming tonight.